Welcome to the Cattleman podcast. I'm your host, Caroline Rosewell Hannon, and I have Jordyn here with me today, and we're going to be discussing our grass yearling operation that we had this summer. In summer of 2025 was the first time that my husband and I had signed on the dotted line, run yearlings on our own, and we learned a ton. So thanks for being here to digest it with us.
I'm excited to dive into this topic with you today. It was so much fun this summer to get to spend time up there with the cattle, having them here. Our first part that we're going to dive into today is what made you decide to want to run cattle up here in the Flathead Valley.
Yeah, so a little bit of background that Jordyn probably knows some of, but we've been running yearlings as a family for a very long time. Like, I can't even tell you when it started. I know that Jacob and Kelsey got married in 2011, and they got engaged in a camper trailer running yearlings on a lease that we had. So at least 15 years we've been running yearlings as a family, but it has been long before then. And so part of what makes our family operation unique in general is that we buy calves at the sale, a lot of times one or two at a time, put them together, and then we can kind of run the type and kind that make money. So we've always joked we kind of have a rainbow herd, like we have every type and kind. My dad said if it's missing a body part, we probably bought it and added some value to it. So running yearlings has just been part of our operation for a long time. So I got into the cattle industry in 2006 when I won an Almeret heifer. So that was the first time I entered really the industry and got my first cow. So that was 19 years ago, was the very first time that I owned a cow of my own. So up until 2025, I've always just had a cow-calf operation. And when I graduated college, I actually took out a young producer loan through the state of Montana. Back up a little bit. So I won an Almeret heifer in 2006, and then I took out a small loan to buy her flush sister. So I had two cows that I really started my foundation with. And then I just kept my replacement heifers and had this pretty small herd until 2015. And so when I graduated college, part of what I did is I took out a pretty substantial loan. I think it was $70,000 at the time. And it was a 10-year note. And I bought 20 or 22, somewhere in there, pairs that had AI bull calves at their side. So they all were half brothers and they were all bred back. So I bought those in like May, June, right after I graduated college. So I went from probably 12 cows to 30 in the matter of an instant. And so my cow herd really took this opportunity to grow. But I'd never really dove into the yearling things. That has always been my brother's job. I mean, sure, I've helped gather, I've helped turn out, I've helped doctor, I've helped take, salt and mineral and all of that. But really, like the management of yearlings, I would even say my dad says he's not involved in that. Like that is Jacob's job. And Jacob does a really great job. As of now, we have multiple ranches leased over multiple states that he manages. And so that has 100% been his bread and butter. So it was actually a really interesting story how we got this lease in Kalispell. I've always wanted to have cows up here. I would have cows anywhere, which is the true fact. But I've always really wanted to have cows closer so I could feel a little bit more involved. Now my cow calf herd is run on shares with my dad just because he is more set up for it than we are. And so I was at our ground beef sale for the rancher's daughter, and we had a line like forming probably an hour before the sale even started. And I was running the cash register. And I don't even know how many transactions we did, but a lot of transactions, like 70 probably or 80 transactions. And we had this little lull in the transactions. And I opened my phone, and the first thing I saw on Facebook Marketplace was the grass lease. And I didn't see, there was very few details. It just said, I want to run cows, like, here's the lease. And it had a phone number. So I messaged the lady and I said, can we set up a time to talk? Well, sure enough, I was the very first person to message her. And so she called, we scheduled a time to go and look at it. And one of the things about me is I like to dive in. So that is very common behavior. It will not shock any of my family members to hear this. But I then called my husband and said, I think I might have just leased us a ranch. And he said he would go look at it with me. So we met the lady, Jordan, Sean, and I went up with her. We looked at the property, and it was like an instant yes to me. I hadn't even figured the logistics. I just was like, yes. Like, even if I can run 10 cows here, I'm going to do it. And so she said, you're the first person. And she leased it to us with really like it was the barrier to entry was really low. Like, she just was like, "You write me a check, you can have the land. I really don't care what you do with it."
What were some of the factors that you liked about it when we actually got to go see it in person?
Well, it was really pretty, so that has nothing to do with the quality of land. It had fresh water, so running water, so water was not any issue, and I was worried about a lot of our leases have tanks, and it feels as if Jacob is always fixing the tank or the tank's running over, the tank's dry. Like, I knew that I was not in any shape to run cattle on a lease that only had tanks. So I think that was number one. Number two was just like the opportunity to run cattle and have land. And so, like, again, the amount of acres didn't really matter. None of that really mattered. Um, and the grass was really good. So we knew that it was a really wet land, and so tons and tons of grass, and you can see that by the wildlife, like, the amount of there's birds and moose and elk and deer, like, the wildlife living there was indication of that, 1, it was had less predators because the animals were there, and 2, it had really good grass. Now, there was a lot of cons, but those were the pluses, and it did have a little bit of a facility so cattle could get off the truck, and on a truck really safely, and there was no cattle really around. And so that part's really nice because, again, we don't have horses or anything like that, and so mixing them with another herd would have caused major concerns early in the summer for us.
What were some of those cons that you saw when we were there?
The cons would be the fence, I think was a huge concern, is a lot of it wasn't fenced or was really poorly fenced, and I think for that property, that's pretty historic. Like, the neighbors would tell us the cows were out all the time. The other thing that maybe wasn't a con that we really understood was, like, is some sinkholes and some, like, really rough parts of the land. She told us about that, she was pretty honest about it, but I'm not sure we really comprehended it until we started building fence and figuring out what we had gotten into.
There's lots of stories, which we'll get to off some of our favorite stories, but of us falling almost into the sinkholes and then being worried that they were cow-sized sinkholes and finding bones and stuff. So there's lots of pieces that you didn't really know until we got into the thick of it, and before you sign on the dotted line, you're not walking every square inch of the lease, so you wouldn't know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Talk me through a little bit about what your initial plan was um, when we first were getting the cattle. So what were some of the initial ideas, and did all those work how we thought they were going to?
Yeah, so let's back up a little bit to our initial plan was I knew I wanted to run some of my own yearlings. So not yearlings I had owned, but yearlings I would purchase. So to give you guys a timeline, this was in May and turnout was June 6th. So we had less than 30 days to get a note leased. I had the cash to pay for the land, but get a note leased, get insurance, build fence on the entire property, pretty much, get cattle, arrange a truck, all of that in less than a month. And we are now, like I said, in late May, so cattle inventory is already short. And so I remember I first texted my brother and I said, I think I leased a ranch. And he called me and he said, "What are you talking about?" And I said, "Well, I think I leased a ranch in Kalispell." He said, "Well, what are you going to do?" I said, "Well, I'm going to position it to my dad to run some yearlings." And he said, "What if your dad doesn't do it?" Which is also his dad.
Because they are dead.
What if our dad doesn't do it? And I said, "Then I'll just run my own." Like, I was willing for the price of the lease, I was willing to take that risk. But I called my dad on the phone and I said, "So I have a business, offer for you. I have leased a ranch in Kalispell," which he was very thrilled about. And I said, "I would like to run some of your yearlings." And he said, "Well, how many can you run and how many can you afford?" And I took out a $65,000 note. So I bought 35 yearlings, which seems crazy. But, I did have a teeny bit left over from that first one that I got in 2015, so they rolled that into, but I was able to buy 35 yearlings, and then my dad filled the rest of the yearlings in, and so he was very gracious in purchasing cattle for us, putting our brand on them, and then he allowed me to, um, take full care of his yearlings and then also make a little bit of revenue on that full care of his yearlings. So our idea was to rotationally graze it because we knew the grass got really tall, and I did not know nearly what I should have known about grass management when we started this lease, just because that has never been something that I had, like, been concerned about.
Mm.
Jacob is so good at looking and understanding, and he knows every cow that's out there, every yearling that's out there, and he can understand if they're stalled or like it's amazing. My brother is really great at what he does. And so because of that, I have always just focused on different areas. Like I've really used him as a clutch in that area. And so she told me the animal units we could have. So we could have 100 or we could have 80. I think we could have 80, 75 or 80 animal units, but yearlings, of course, are zero point 0.7 of an animal unit. So we decided to run 100 yearlings. We were going to rotationally graze, and the property is a mile. And so we were going to run big electric fence and then have 4 different pastures and kind of just rotate them throughout those pastures. That was really great in theory. In practice, that was really terrible because they had not been hot wire broke, which almost every calf that comes to Rose Cattle Company is hot wire broke, but we just bought them so fast that they didn't have time to do that. And our hot wire wasn't hot, which is also another concern. And the equipment for the hot wires cost us $1,200 and was not sturdy. So I don't we still like that feels still kind of a mystery to me how we would do it. We didn't need to, luckily. We survived all summer without doing rotational grazing, but rotational grazing was the initial plan.
Speaking about the yearlings, so you said that you ran 100 head of yearlings. What class and weight were they?
So they were all heifers. So we ran spayed heifers. And they came onto the lease weighing in the mid fives.
Why did you choose to do spayed heifers?
That is mostly what we run. One, they're a little bit more affordable. Two, with spayed heifers, we get almost the performance of a steer. And we had other spayed heifers that when we went to sell them could fit on that contract.
Mhm.
I'm learning as we talk more about spayed heifers that that is kind of a unique thing for Montana, Wyoming, the Dakotas. Like that is not an common behavior, common operational trait. So when you spay heifers, you remove the ovaries. So they do not cycle and they don't have the opportunity to get bred. When we didn't really know if there was going to be other cattle around, it is a good decision to run spayed heifers because it helps with management of getting in with other cattle. And also they don't ride each other. And so you don't have any of that like injury potential when they're riding each other.
So now we've kind of gone through the background of getting the lease set up, getting the cattle arriving. What were kind of the day-to-day realities after that once we were managing the cattle?
So the fencing was really a huge concern. Like we were very nervous about that. And thank the Lord for my husband because he brought his wildland fire crew up during work hours and they built fence. And we would not have nowhere close to, yes, it would never have happened. And I would say we got to the fence 80%
Mhm.
before we turned out urine. So again, we're taking quite a risk here. We had a few routines on the day to day. So when we'd come up, we'd of course check salt and mineral. We'd check for health. And then we started caking the yearlings, which we did not have horses and we cannot rope. And so doctoring was immediately like a huge concern, something I was very concerned with. It's so funny because my brother spends a ton of time doctoring and again, I ran 100 yearlings and he on one place ran 1,500 and there's multiple places, but he was so low key about the doctoring. He just said, "Oh, it'll be fine. You don't need to doctor. I can doctor that one when they ship home." Like he was so low key about the doctoring, and I was really panicked. So we tried to order a dark gun right when we first got the cattle, and they were back ordered for 6 weeks. So this would put us, we're the first week in June.
Mhm.
This would put us in mid July before we got a dark gun. So there's a really kind gentleman in Kalispell who deserves a ton of praise because we should have just partnered with him on this Polaris. So how I actually met him is through my dad, but he was in a motel, I don't know if you know this, in Missoula at breakfast, heard my dad on the phone buying cattle and came up and said, "Would you be interested in my cows? I have cows for sale." And my dad said, "Sure." So his name's Johnny. We bought Johnny's cows. My dad and I went and shipped them together, and he lives in Kalispell. So he was a great rooster. Johnny allowed us to borrow a dark gun, which was so helpful. We bought a bottle of Draxon, and we'd go out there, and a lot of times we'd like check health and then come back and doctor
Mhm.
because we were trying to shoot them from the four-wheeler with the dart gun. I'll never forget, my husband doctored the first 3 times probably when we went out there, doctored them, and the dart gun had some learning curves, and we can put the kind
Mhm.
that we used, in the show notes for you guys, but the dart gun definitely had some learning curves, And I remember the first time I think he went on a fire.
Mhm.
And I said, "Jordyn, it's us. Like, we have to go up here and doctor." And I'll never forget, Jordan's driving. She gets me in the right position. I pull the trigger and it's like a perfect shot.
Mhm.
She was so surprised that I could shoot the dart gun. And then she goes, "My dad, so surprised." And then we talked to my husband. They're all very surprised that I could shoot and hit with the dart gun. But the dart gun ended up being a really successful method for us to doctor. I wouldn't say that it was super easy all the time because they were really gentle by the end of the summer because we did kick them almost every time we went out there, but it was something that we could do or even do by ourselves,
Mhm.
as a single person on a four-wheeler, like, we could go out and doctor, but the big thing was we did have some elk,
Mhm.
potentially deer eating the salt mineral, so that keeping that up to speed was important. Also checking we never got a count to 100 after they got off the truck, and we ended up being 2 short at shipping, and so well, 3 short of shipping, yeah. So we tried to always count them, drive around, check everything, but also we really enjoyed going up there, and so I think that helped because it was, like, no cell phone service, it's beautiful. We'll put
Mhm.
some pictures and stuff so you guys can see, but we really enjoyed going up there, and so the first month we went up every single day, and my dad nicely said, "They're okay. You don't have to go up quite as much." And then it went to, like, every couple days, and then by August, it was, like, once a week because we were just so busy running and trying to get everything done. But those were really our management. There was not a lot of other things to worry about. We didn't have any predator problems that we know of. Um, we had, like, 1 or 2 heifers that would get out, but they were all cake broke. So literally the moment we started shaking that cake bucket, they're hopping the fence right back in. And so they for the most part, it was pretty easy management.
Yeah. I think some of the one of the funny stories from the lease is, uh, we would try to count them every single time, and one time we got to 101. Most of the time we'd get to about 75 and then be like, "Where are you at?" And so it was always a joke that, "Are we sure we got 100 off the truck? Did 100 actually arrive?" And they did arrive. We ended up with 100 at the end. One of them did pass away, so at that point, what is the protocol for that? What is the death loss expected on a lease like this?
Yeah, so my brother kind of told me that industry standards would be 2 to 3%. Our standards is less than that, which if you know my brother Jacob, you're probably laughing. He was like, "I would try to keep it under 1%." Luckily, we our death loss was 1%. We have no idea what happened. We found her bones and a little bit of her hide. Looks like maybe she got stuck in a hole, maybe broke her leg and couldn't get up. Like, it happened so fast because we were checking them pretty regularly.
Mhm.
And so we don't know what happened with that one, but when we did get on the truck, my brother we were counting them on the truck, right? And again, we had never quite gone to 100, and so we had already found the bone, so we knew we were 1 short,
Mhm.
and I wanted to do a good job. I mean, that was part of it is, like, I was the caretaker for someone else's cattle, and so I really wanted to do a really good job and have a successful summer, and so when we loaded the truck, my brother said we were 4 short, so 1 dead, so 3 short.
Mhm.
And I said, "Are you sure?" I said, "I think I think we're only 2 short." And he said, "Well, the last time I counted wrong was 10 years ago." I said, "Well, that's a bummer." So, the last time he counted wrong was his sister's yearlings off of summer grass because he was wrong. Luckily, we only were missing 2, and so I had immediately called the brand inspector, and I was like, "These heifers are somewhere." And so we did end up finding them in with another herd. They had gone through a whole pasture without anything over the top of the hill, and gotten in with some cow-calf pairs. And luckily, Johnny comes back into the story. He was able to go and help us out because again, this summer we did not own a horse trailer, but we solved that now.
Yeah. I think the best part of this is you just say like, "Oh, over the pasture hill." It is so far where these yearlings ended up because I got to go on the other side of that hill the other day. I am shocked. They went on quite the adventure. I wish we could have a camera on them because it is has to be so much wildlife where they're at. It's very like rural and remote. Nobody's out there. There's like one wedding venue, but other than that, like it is the middle of nowhere. It's very far where they ended up. So it's a miracle that the brand inspector found them
Yeah.
and that Johnny was able to go pick them up and keep them for a few days before they could get hauled back to where they went.
It was really interesting because the moment I told the brand inspector, "Hey, we're missing 2," they both had my dad's brand on them, which was also interesting. So mine was the death loss, and then I lost 2 of his is what he said, but we found them. Um the moment I told the brand inspector, he's like, "Oh, I know which herd they got into." Like, he knew that that property does lead to those cattle joining, even though we never saw those cattle all summer, like, it's a long ways apart, but what a relief. At first, when they called, they left me a voicemail, it sounded like they were dead. Like, someone said, "I see evidence of your heifers," and I was like, "Dang, like, 3% death loss? I might be fired." But luckily, they were alive and well, and, we bought a horse trailer because we didn't have a horse trailer, and we're down to 1 at the ranch at the moment, and so the ranch is 4 hours one way. So for us to go down, get a horse trailer, and come back is an 8-hour trip and then take the heifers,
Mhm.
and so we recently bought a big Ben trailer.
Yep.